August 8th, 1963, 3:03 a.m. A stretch of railway track near Ledburn, Buckinghamshire, England. A Royal Mail train carrying 128 postal workers hurtles through the darkness at 75 miles per hour. Packed inside the second coach, high-value package car, sits £2.6 million in used banknotes. That's roughly £57 million today. The driver, a 58-year-old veteran named Jack Mills, spots a signal glowing amber ahead, then red. He applies the brakes. He doesn't know it yet, but that red signal is a lie. Someone's covered the green light with a leather glove and wired a battery to the red lens. In the next 17 minutes, 15 masked men will carry out the largest robbery in British history. No guns will be fired. No one will be killed. And yet this crime will haunt the British justice system for over half a century. This is the Great Train Robbery. And what actually happened that night is darker, stranger, and more carefully orchestrated than anything you've been told. To understand what happened on that stretch of Buckinghamshire Railway, you have to rewind roughly 18 months. To a cramped flat in southeast London where a man named Bruce Reynolds sat at a kitchen table, chain-smoking and sketching diagrams on the back of an envelope. Reynolds was 31 years old, lean, sharp-faced, a career criminal, sure, but a particular kind, meticulous, disciplined, and almost obsessively detail-oriented. He'd pulled off a successful airport heist at London Heathrow in 1962, netting around £62,000. But that job had whetted his appetite for something bigger, something that would set him and his crew up for life. He'd received a tip, and the source was a man known in court documents only as the Ulsterman, an insider connected to the Royal Mail's sorting offices. His real identity has never been conclusively confirmed, though investigators long suspected a postal worker named Patrick McKenna. The tip was simple, but staggering. Every night, a traveling post office train ran from Glasgow Central to London Euston. On certain nights, particularly after bank holiday weekends, the high-value package coach carried extraordinary amounts of cash, used untraceable banknotes being transferred from Scottish and Northern English banks to the vaults of the Bank of England. Reynolds listened. He didn't react right away. He asked questions. How many coaches? Where exactly was the money stored? How many guards? What kind of locks? Then he started assembling his team. He had 15 men in total, each one hand-picked. Gordon Goody, a 6'2" antique dealer and thief with a taste for expensive suits. Charlie Wilson, Stutznet, quiet, reliable, considered the most professional criminal in South London. Buster Edwards, a former boxer and flower stall owner with a reputation for staying calm under pressure. Ronnie Biggs, a small-time crook with a thin criminal record, brought on for one specific reason. He supposedly knew a retired train driver who could move the locomotive once they'd separated the coaches. And that was the plan. Elegant in its simplicity, terrifying in its ambition. Stop the train. Separate the engine and first two coaches from the rest. Drive them half a mile forward to Britigo Bridge, where the gang would be waiting with a Land Rover and an ex-army truck. Unload the cash. Vanish into the Buckinghamshire countryside. Reynolds spent months scouting the route. He drove the roads around Cheddington and Linslade at night, timing distances, noting police patrol patterns. The crew rehearsed at Leatherslade Farm, a remote property they'd purchased for £5,500, through a front man named John Weeder, a solicitor who handled the conveyancing without asking too many questions. The farm sat 27 miles from the planned robbery site, far enough to avoid suspicion, close enough to reach quickly in the dark. They chose August 8th deliberately. The Glasgow-Euston mail train would be running heavy after the August bank holiday. More deposits, more transfers, more cash than usual sitting in those canvas mailbags. Now, 3:03 a.m. The night itself, in the train, officially designated the Up Special, left Glasgow Central at 6:50 p.m. on August 7th, picking up mailbags at stops along the way. By the time it reached Leighton Buzzard, 70 postal workers were sorting mail in the rear coaches. Up front in the high-value package coach, the second vehicle behind the engine, 5 post office workers guarded 128 mailbags stuffed with banknotes. The gang had positioned themselves along the track near Sears Crossing, between Leighton Buzzard and Cheddington. Roger Cordry, the gang's electronics expert, had tampered with the signal gantry. He'd climbed the signal post, covered the green lens with a suede glove, and attached a 6-volt battery to the red light with crocodile clips. Crude, but effective. Driver Jack Mills saw the amber distance signal first. The standard protocol, reduce speed. Then the home signal showed red. He braked. The train ground to a halt. His fireman, David Whitby, 26 years old, climbed down from the cab to use the trackside telephone and call the signalman. The phone line was dead. The gang had cut it. Whitby turned. Shadows materialized around him. Hands grabbed him. Someone pushed him down the embankment. A voice hissed, "If you shout, I'll kill you." He didn't shout. Up in the cab, Jack Mills had perhaps 3 seconds of confusion before masked men swarmed through the door. He struggled. A metal bar, likely a cosh wrapped in cloth, struck him above the right eye. Blood poured down his face. He went down, but didn't lose consciousness. The blow fractured no bones, but the wound was deep, ugly. Mills would suffer headaches, memory problems, and depression for the rest of his life. He died in 1970. His family always maintained the robbery killed him, just slowly. Here's where the plan hit its first snag. Ronnie Biggs's retired train driver, a man named Stan Agate in his 60s, climbed into the cab, looked at the controls, and froze. The locomotive was an English Electric Type 4 diesel. The controls were different from what he'd driven years before. His hands hovered over the console. He couldn't do it. Reynolds had seconds to decide. He forced the bleeding Jack Mills back into the driver's seat. "Move the train," he ordered. Mills, dazed and terrified, complied. He drove the detached front section and the engine and first 2 coaches exactly half a mile down the track to Bridego Bridge. What followed was 17 minutes of controlled fury, and the gang formed a human chain. From the HVP coach to the vehicles parked on the road below the bridge. Mailbag after mailbag, each weighing roughly 60 pounds, passed from hand to hand. They worked fast, silently. A few of the postal workers inside the coach were handcuffed and pushed to the floor. Frank Dewhurst, the senior postal worker, was struck when he tried to resist. Nobody fought after that. At 3:20 a.m., Reynolds gave the signal. Enough. They'd loaded 120 of the 128 mailbags. The Land Rover and the truck, now sagging on their axles, pulled away into the dark. The haul, when they counted it at Leatherslade Farm later that morning, was staggering. 2,631,684 pounds in used banknotes, stacked across the floor of the farmhouse kitchen, piled on tables, stuffed into holdalls. In today's money, approximately 57 million pounds. All for about 48 hours. It seemed like the perfect crime. Then it unraveled. Quickly, almost comically. The first mistake was Leatherslade Farm itself. The plan called for the gang to stay hidden there for several days, then clean the property of all evidence before leaving. But panic set in. Someone heard a police helicopter, possibly imagined, and the gang scattered ahead of schedule. They left the farm a forensic gold mine. Buckinghamshire Constabulary, led by Detective Superintendent Malcolm Futrell, and later joined by Detective Chief Superintendent Tommy Butler of Scotland Yard's Flying Squad, found the farm on August 13th, 5 days after the robbery. What they discovered inside was astonishing. Fingerprints on ketchup bottles, Monopoly board pieces, and window sills. A receipt from a local shop. Sleeping bags still warm. The gang had apparently passed the time playing Monopoly, reportedly using real stolen banknotes instead of the game's paper money. That detail might be embellished. But the fingerprints weren't. Within weeks, the arrests began. Roger Corddry was the first, caught on August 14th in Bournemouth with £141,000 stashed in a rented garage. Charlie Wilson, Gordon Goody, Ronnie Biggs, Roy James. One by one, Scotland Yard's Flying Squad tracked them down. The fingerprint evidence from Leatherslade Farm was devastating, nearly impossible to challenge in court. The trial began on January 20th, 1964 at Aylesbury Assizes in Buckinghamshire. It lasted from January to April, one of the longest criminal trials in English history at the time. 12 defendants stood in the dock. The prosecution, led by Arthur James QC, presented methodical to overwhelming evidence. The defense teams tried to challenge the fingerprint methodology, but the forensic work held. The sentences, when they came down on April 15th and 16th, 1964, shocked the nation. 30 years apiece for 7 of the robbers: Goody, Wilson, James, Hussey, Welch, Wisby, and Biggs. 30 years. For context, the average sentence for manslaughter in Britain at the time was roughly 7 to 10 years. The judge, Justice Edmund Davies, wanted to send a message. He succeeded. But many, including legal scholars and civil rights advocates, argued the sentences were grotesquely disproportionate. No one had died during the robbery. Mills's injuries, while serious, weren't life-threatening. The story should have ended there. It didn't. Ronnie Biggs escaped from Wandsworth Prison on July 8, 1965, barely 15 months into his sentence. He scaled the wall using a rope ladder thrown over by accomplices, landed in a waiting furniture van, and vanished. He fled to Paris, then Australia, then eventually to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where he lived openly for decades, protected by the fact that Brazil had no extradition treaty with the UK, and that his girlfriend had given birth to a Brazilian-born son. Charlie Wilson escaped even earlier, on August 12, 1964, from Winson Green Prison in Birmingham. He was recaptured in Canada in January 1968. Buster Edwards fled to Mexico City with his wife and young daughter, but he couldn't handle the isolation, the heat, The language barrier. He surrendered voluntarily in September 1966 and received a reduced sentence of 15 years. Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind, he evaded capture, the longest of those initially identified. He fled to Mexico, then the south of France, then Canada. Scotland Yard caught up with him in Torquay, Devon on November 8, 1968, 5 years after the robbery. He received 25 years. Of the £2.6 million stolen, police recovered only £396,000. The rest, roughly £2.2 million, was never found. Some of it was almost certainly taken by intermediaries, money launderers, and the criminal networks that helped the gang disappear. Some of it was spent, and some of it perhaps is still out there, hidden in walls, buried in gardens, locked in safety deposit boxes under false names. Jack Mills returned to work eventually. He drove trains again. But colleagues said he was never the same. The headaches didn't stop. He became withdrawn, anxious. When he died of leukemia in 1970 at age 64, the tabloids blamed the robbery. The medical evidence was ambiguous, but the narrative stuck. Ronnie Biggs returned voluntarily to Britain in 2001, old, frail, and in poor health. He was immediately arrested and sent back to prison. He served several more years before being released on compassionate grounds in 2009, barely able to walk or speak, following multiple strokes. He died on December 18, 2013. He was 84. Bruce Reynolds died the same year, April 28, 2013. He'd spent his later years living modestly in South London, reportedly broke. The Great Train Robbery remains, adjusted for inflation, one of the largest cash robberies in history. But here's what lingers. Not the money, not the sentences, not even the escapes. It's the image of 15 men standing in the dark beside a railway line in the English countryside, watching a red light they'd built themselves, waiting for a train that carried more money than most of them could comprehend. They had 17 minutes. They nearly got away with it. Nearly.